It's just a theory, but most wars by imperialist cultures, i.e. the white cultures of this world, are fought against brown-skinned people, especially the ones who sit on top of most of the oil. And 2 million people, a massive amount of people marched in London, and another 15 to 50 million, whatever the figure was, marched across the world against the Iraq war, and all he could say was, I understand how you feel. And that was that, fuck off, more or less. But instead of Thatcher would have said, fuck off, I'm going to war, Blair would say, I understand how you feel, but I'm doing the right thing. Basically, he's doing what Bush tells him to, because they're all part of this fucking secret sect of fucking Bohemian Grove fuckwits who want to control the entire planet and get control of all the resources on it. Why, I do not know. He was said, like, oh no, what, is it money you want? You know, have all the money in the world, print yourself billions and billions of dollars, but they've already got that, so it can't be money. You can have all the power you want. You can be President of the United States, biggest country in the world. Nope, shit, they've already got that. So what the fuck do they want? You know what I mean? What they want is more oil to run all their fucking SUVs in order to make more money. And then they've already got the money, so it beats me what they want. So I think they're in a league with the devil, or some fucking pact or some sort of supernatural source, or they're just fucking complete bastards with no fucking soul whatsoever. I think that's the final conclusion we have to make. Which is why you have to stand up for what little rights are left over and sort of take control of your own life and get together with other people who are thinking the same thing before you start to think that I'm the only one left thinking anything different from what's being fed to me. What? What's the question?
No, I don't believe in Jesus Christ. My mother died of cancer when I was 5. No, I don't believe in religion. I was forced to go to church. I wasn't told why. No, I don't believe in the police. For police brutality isn't a dream. No, I don't believe in the system, but nothing it does make sense to me. Don't worry, you'll get over it. You'll grow up. You'll calm down. Another youth, another fashion. You'll get over it. You'll calm down. You don't really mean what you say. You've had too much to drink. Don't be so full of hatred. It's not as bad as you think. No, I don't believe in what you say. You're just part of what I despise. Yes, you're part of that fucking system. I am blind enough to see your lies. Cause the system thrives on ignorance. What the public don't know, they can't reject. In the face of you all, I stand defiant. The rest of the people, they wanna forget.
In the beginning there was Crass, although as reluctant leaders of an anarcho-punk movement that essentially eschewed all leadership, I doubt they'll thank me for saying that. But they were year zero, a very literal line in the sand that translated as, enough is enough. No more corporate companies misrepresenting their music. This was the birth of genuinely DIY labels, whose records were sold at virtually cost price, and bearing pay no more than notices to make sure they were. No more big booking agents controlling their punk shows, levelling extortionate guarantees. Now the fans of the music themselves could communicate directly with the bands and book them into alternative venues at affordable prices, the meagre door takings being ploughed back into worthwhile causes locally. No more glossy magazines dictating how punk should look, sound and behave. Anyone who could string 2 words together and use a stapler was now a potential fanzine editor. And no more inane lyrics about cider and glue. The kids were taking back control and finally making a difference. Crass ushered in a whole new concept of punk as a movement, and that movement, for all its naive shortcomings, made its mark around the world. Fueled by the very real evils of Thatcherism, economic depression and the nuclear threat that hung over the UK like a funeral pall, anarcho-punk kick-started the mindset of a generation that would ultimately make serious headway in the struggle for human and animal rights. 1984 came and went, and the world didn't go up in smoke, but the hopes and fears of these bands mean as much today, if not more in many ways, as they did back then.
Crass and what they represent are attacked politically from all sides. The right see them simply as criminals out to destroy the existing structures of society. The left see them as hopeless utopians, deviationists, nearer to a bunch of bandits. As for the authorities, they don't like anarchists in general because they're unpredictable. You can never tell how they're going to react to a given political situation. Safe so long as their aggression expresses itself in music, for example. Dangerous if they decide on some kind of direct action against authority.
As is all the projects we do, you know, you start off with 2 and end up with 32 because anyone who came along could join in. I mean, it's always been an absolute principle that our art is not exclusive. You know, our individual efforts as artists are not exclusive to us. You know, that if someone comes along and says, wow, I can do that, or I'd like to do that, then the response is, we'll do it then, you know, and so that's how that's how Crass came about. It didn't come about by any formal idea. Half of us couldn't play a fucking thing anyway, you know, and weren't interested in playing a thing. We were just interested in being together and sharing ideas.
I guess one of the recurring themes in the book is, I mean, it's obviously a book about anarcho-punk, and the very second you stick a tag like anarcho-punk on something like anarcho-punk, it's becomes a redundant concept, because the whole idea behind sort of anarchic punk was that it didn't want to be tagged, pigeonholed, you know, and controlled in that manner. And as soon as the media grasped it and could lay claim to it, it lost some of its power. So it wanted to shirk off these labels. I refer to it as anarcho-punk purely for convenience, you know, with in hindsight. So people need to be aware that I don't define it rigidly as anarcho-punk being this, this and this. It wasn't like that at all. The label's purely for convenience. But obviously doing a book about anarcho-punk, one of the things I wanted to tap into is, were these bands, did they really regard themselves as anarchists, or did they regard themselves as punks with vague anarchist tendencies, or what? And everybody had a very different concept of anarchy, and you know, I wanted to tap into that, really, just find out whether they thought anarchy could work then. You know, could it have worked? Can it still work? What was it? Why was it? What did it mean to them? The beauty of punk rock has always been it's what you want it to be. You know, it is what it is, but essentially it's what you want it to be. And anarcho-punk was very much that I asked 100 different people what anarchy was, and I got 100 different answers.
Back the question, bend the truth. It's a dog bomb and I'm banging into our wood trees right. Tired woods and people. Say I'm stuck here, man, it'll be f***ed. I've got nothing better to do. Find a truth that when it's done. Mum and daddy, I made tonight, I'm up to me. And the woods the trenches, don't tell me one right. I got the thumbs on the fuck. Oi, oi, I want a life of life protect.
They sell us love as divinity.
As slaves to that trilogy.
I don't see Crass as being anything different to anything that's happened out of this place, you know, over the last 40 years. It was probably one of the most publicly acknowledged projects that we ever were involved in. But I certainly don't see it as any more important than the innumerable projects that came out of the house both prior to it and after it. I don't see, I mean, to me, it wasn't an important part of my life. It was just an extension of my life, as my life now is an extension of it. The fact that we sold lots of records and lots of people were interested, you know, was really of no consequence in terms of, you know, the artistic and political programme. You know, we were doing what we've always done from here, and that's trying to live our own lives and live them honestly.
I think an important thing about anarcho-punk is it wasn't about one band or 10 bands. It wasn't about one label. It was about a national underground fabric of all these bands. It was the bands in the far-flung places like Psychofaction from Cleator Moor in Cumbria. I mean, never released or recorded anything, but I mean, you could argue they were as important a part of the scene as Crass. I mean, they enabled Crass to play in the Northwest. You know, they pulled all the punks together in that area. You know, that was what made the anarcho-punk scene tick, I think. It was all the bands toiling in all the little towns around the countryside. It wasn't a London-centric scene at all. Although by virtue of the density of population in London, you had more bands spring up there than anywhere else. But I mean, we had very potent anarcho-punk bands spring up within 5 miles of where I live, who played like 3 gigs and never recorded a demo, but still managed to burn themselves into, you know, into my memory and the memories of hundreds of people who attended their gigs.
although, you know, the great crass line, there is no authority but yourself, didn't occur until actually fairly towards the end of Crass's era. You know, that's always been the fundamental in this place. There's no authority but yourself, you know. Come in.
We were starting to do gigs with Crass. Kevin then left, and the drummer left. And I think we then moved over more to the sort of stuff Crass were into. And things got a little, you know, a lot more political.
I think that's probably why I left the first time round, because the drummer and I used to have similar views. In the Epileptics, it had been usually Colin and Derek on one side, probably trying to push the sort of Crass side of things, and me and Richard, we just enjoyed being in a band, you know. And it's not to say we didn't want to play that sort of music, we did, but I certainly didn't feel as I felt as strongly about things as Colin and Derek did. So when Richard decided to leave at the end of '79, I thought, well, I'll probably best go as well, because I think it would be a tighter unit if I wasn't in it, you know, politically.
Killing Joke were a big influence. I saw them while we were still living down in Devon. Went to a C&D rally in 1980, I think it was, Trafalgar Square, and Killing Joke played there. We'd got records and stuff by them before, but they were just absolutely an intense experience, and really something that was positively inspiring. There was a kind of we liked the stance that people like Crass had, because they were these short staccato bursts of stuff, and very aggressive lyrically and all the rest. Musically, it wasn't something I really thought was brilliant, but Killing Joke were absolute genius at that time. I'd never heard anything like it.
Everything that was going on at the time was just your love songs and your money songs and pop music, and it didn't mean anything to me at all. Rock and roll, it was just a dream music to me, so I wasn't interested in that music at all. So when I first heard, the first band I ever heard was the Sex Pistols, that I was first ever interested in, and the system and the way they went against the state, and that had an influence for me. God Save the Queen and all those lyrics that was running around my head at school. It's meant a lot of things to me, and that started to change me, and I started to reflect. And straight after there was the first ever band that I was ever really influenced with was Crass. It was an anarchist band from late 70s, early 80s. And I visited them at the commune they had in Epping. And Crass were people that actually put the meaning of punk into real life. They started to actually, I saw them, people for the first time, they could actually live what you call punk at the time, and they lived a collective life against the system, and the lyrics that they held broke down all the barriers and really started to change the way I saw things and the way I saw life, and made a heavily influence the way I saw things at those early teenage years. For all the system and what was going on and all I could see around me every day on the TV and the media, they gave me actually answers for the problems that I was seeing in society every day. Crass gave me some answers and some solutions about what you can do. He said you can't change the system by bombing number 10. Systems are made out of people.
When I kick out your front door, how you gonna come? With your hands on your head or on the trigger of your gun. When the law breaks in, how you gonna go? Drop down on the pavement or waiting in death row. You can crush us, you can bruise us, but you'll have to answer to.
Right, Brixton Academy, I decided again, fuck knows why, probably some half fucking mental or something, that I was going to do a massive gap.
Like everything's always been in the band, somebody calls it on and it's like, all right then, right, all right, we'll get the fucking Brixton Academy. Yeah.
Again, not planned, just something that I thought, right, all these bands are doing this, we've come as far as we can here, let's do something really major, let's get the Academy. Booked it under Rough Trade, nicked a bit of their paper, who was doing our distribution, stole it out of their office, made out it was Rough Trade hiring it, got it hired, got the gig on, got it to £2.50, which was fucking unheard of.
I'd never done a gig at that price ever.
got it on. Everything was good. You kind of knew it was going to go wrong from the start because it was such a big thing. You know what I mean? You had people from all over Europe, and you knew it was itching to happen. Didn't know quite what was going to happen, but you knew something would go wrong. That many angry people in one place, something's going to happen, you know. And it just did. It fell into a chaotic mess within itself. There was 5,000-6,000 people there. The police was on the top balcony watching the whole thing, watching films of them beating people up before we played. It was all, do you know what I mean? And we knew that was happening. And it had turned into a game because I knew the police was in there because I was told they was there, and I knew that we was watching things, and it just all become a little bit. Oh, weird. Is this a theatre show tonight, or is this one of the biggest punk gatherings of all time? And then what happened is the security got heavy-handed. I asked people to come through the barriers and behave themselves. 90% of them did. 10% of them didn't. Stage invasion. Security came on with dogs. Even more sick, considering what it was about. But and the rest is history. It kicked right off outside, and that was that.
In Belfast, it wasn't. We never really saw anarcho-punk. We never defined it as that. It was kind of anarchism, and punk was just a kind of cultural process attached to it. And anarchism at that time had a kind of long history attached to it, and a long history in how it defined itself. And every anarchist had a different theory on the world and so on. So punk was just a kind of interpretation of how anarchism would be.
I just wanted to keep away from all that. Flowers in the Dustbin, I wanted to be adamant, not Benny Rember. And yeah, I mean, we reacted to the sort of the black and white sleeves and the black clothes by wearing colourful clothes and having colourful sleeves. We did a record with Conflict, and the first point really when we talked about that was I said I want a colour sleeve, because I just couldn't understand why in such an individualist movement, individualist in the positive sense, why everybody was buying into kind of uniforms and uniformity. I thought that was disastrous, and I still think it was disastrous. To buy into style as uniform is to negate any positive things style might offer. And style can offer a lot of positive things, both aesthetically and politically. And I thought that they were absolutely missing the boat on that front. So I tried to keep Flowers in the Dustbin as far away from that. And not just me, everybody in the band tried to keep Flowers in the Dustbin as far away from that as we could. We wanted colour. We wanted Technicolor. And we weren't the only ones as well. And there was people like Rubella Ballet.
It was about the clothes at the beginning, and then it was about places to go where we looked like that, and then it was about the music. You couldn't buy records that were punk in those days. You had to find a band, and then there was a kind of scene started. It was bands, music, people talking. That's how it started for me in 1976.
77, 78, we'd done some gigs, but they were kind of, you know, sort of slightly chaotic affairs, and there wouldn't be that many songs, you know, that we had to play, but we'd go on and we'd do this kind of, you know, sort of free-form, spontaneous kind of thing. But, you know, as the band went on and people kind of left and other people joined, it kind of solidified much more around playing songs, and I started to write songs quite seriously at that point. And the songs I was writing, you know, were kind of, you know, affected by our environment and by all the other things that was, you know, by that time the whole sort of like punk thing had taken off, and I mean, I never regarded myself as a punk, really.
We tried really hard to take the whatever the rules were with this thing and how you were sort of expected to do things. We did it, and I think we did it really enthusiastically, and we really went overboard with it. So, like for instance, the idea of doing your own fanzines and your own tapes and that sort of thing. We really went for it. We had a cellar basement that we got old printers, and we had an old sort of letterpress printer, we had an old sort of spirit printer. We had two of those that we got. Both the spirit printers we got from Skips, because at the time people were throwing them away at the university, and with this letterpress printer, and we desperately made books and magazines and research things, and did loads of stuff that we had a pot of money. Anyone's money that they got from part-time jobs or from the door all went together. There was nobody had individual money, and we really took the whole ethos to the point where we thought, let's really do this properly, and then from this money we'd pay for all this stuff to get printed and all, the paper. We'd have big production lines of people stapling things, and it was a big cottage industry, and whether we were involved in stuff that was local, going out in local political things, or to do with the band where, we'd play gigs. Almost every gig we had booklets that we just gave away free that had lyrics in, or tried to explain some of the songs, and we really wanted to do it properly, and we were totally into it. And I think that it was a fantastic thing, and I think that I loved it. How we went to Bristol really early on and played a squat gig in an old church with who was it with? The Meebics and Concrete Socks, I can't remember. And it was their sort of fledgling Bristol scene, and we'd sort of gone down from Leeds with our van and all our leaflets and everything, and they thought we were complete weirdos. But we felt, this is great, these people are just sort of, there's so much, they're just loud, dirty, squatty punks, and they're fantastic, and we loved it, and we were totally part of it, but we didn't look like them. We were, there were always lots of women involved in what we do, and we didn't wear all that clothing all the time, and our stage show was always a bit off kilter. But we desperately wanted to be part of that thing. We didn't want to be set apart just because we played slightly different kind of music or looked a bit different.
the band I was in was a band called Psychofaction. We started in like 1979, and at the time we were sort of like 1,000. Well, if I could make probably 10,000 sort of bedroom bands, you know. We had like one 2-string guitar between about 5 of us, and very much like the lyrics of the Clash, Garageland, you know. 10 guitar players, 1 guitar, a bit like that. You know, we had lots of members but no equipment. And oddly enough, we survived for 5 years. We survived without any equipment whatsoever. You know, and that was always my regret. The fact that we had loads of interest in us. We had loads of interest because, you know, our sort of claim to fame is that we actually appeared on the Christ the album sort of booklet. They listed like 6 bands. Crass listed 6 bands who they thanked for shared gigs. And we were one of the bands, and we became enigmatic, and it's like, I can still say it now, people think, oh, this fucking band or anything else.
Every time I hear a plan overhead, I think if the afternoon I feel me dead.
I think just basically I think liberation, you know, it was liberating yourself first and foremost, liberating your own thought processes, just questioning the things that you've done day in, day out, you know, for all the, you know, for all of your life. And I don't think there was any dogmatic structure to any of it. It was just a case of starting you on that road of questioning, and some people felt uncomfortable with that questioning and, you know, pulled back from it, just listened to the music, just pogoed at the front of the gigs. Other people felt uncomfortable with the music, but, you know, were very open to where where the lyrics would take them.
The anarcho scene was more about doing it yourself, more about putting on your own gigs, releasing your own records, whereas the 1977 lot were already, you know, full on sucking off the man, you know, getting whatever they want, getting record deals, and this, you know, the anarcho scene wasn't about that. It was about taking back what was yours, taking back the rights to your records, taking back the rights to the land. You know, it's important to be political as it was to be musical, to be in a band. Even though now some of it stands up, I think, musically, but some of it sounds like complete and utter dog's bollocks.
There's some occasions, some special events, you could say they were heaven sent. They engrave the stones with Roman numerals. My favourite ones, they're royal funerals, royal funerals, royal funerals. I want more of royal funerals, royal funerals, royal funerals. I want more of...
People had to make a stand against what they believed in, what they believed in, the right or the wrong. And you had to be held accountable to what you believed in, and hopefully you'd act upon those words as well. So the movement grew also lyrically, it grew musically, and also it grew active-wise. There was a lot of things going on. As Liberty developed and as the band started to grow and we started to play more and more gigs around the country with different bands, it was important that we felt that at our concerts we wanted to just do more than just play as well. So we linked up with organisations such as Class War, and when we was at our concerts they would put on stalls around and give out literature as well. So something that was influenced to say that, like, when the concert's playing and the band's playing as well, you can have some leaflets and some political message can also go out to people and they can read that message. And really, if we're being honest about it, within Liberty we learnt all these things from Crass. Because without Crass there wouldn't really be conflict, or there wouldn't be any bands that we know today, you know. Sometimes people find it hard to admit that, or they don't admit that, but that's the truth.
It was very, very easy for the right wing to assume that because you didn't agree with the right wing, you was obviously left wing. You know, and I think in them days that was the situation. You're a commie band, full stop. It's not that you hate the left wing as much as you hate us, or you think Stalin's as bad as Hitler. You don't. You're a commie. And I think that was it. And I think, but from my point of view, where conflict was different is the fact that I wasn't going to have gigs smashed up, and there was only one language that they understood, and that was for us to fight back, because they'd walked all over us, the same as they'd walked all over other gigs. So, do you understand what I mean? So we stood up in a different way, stood up and was counted as stuff. Because of that, we was kind of alienated by a lot of the anarcho scene as being, you know, we weren't into the peace side of things. You know, everyone loves peace, but we was also really
thugs.
We was thugs, and you know, we
bollocks. We stayed alive.
Yeah, but if we hadn't, we would have been walked over because we was targeted more than any other people.
It's pretty full on. You know, after a tour, wasn't much space to really relax, for me anyway. But, plus all the other things we got up to. So, but I mean, it's my choice, and I chose to do it, so it's good. Like I choose to do what I do now, so which isn't very dissimilar, except it's not on the road in the same sense. But, and obviously the work that I do isn't the same visually, but I like to think it still is, you know, in spirit. It's a little harder to grasp, I think. It's not in your face so much.
Because anybody who's doing anything creative in any form, they have a responsibility. And the word that people put out across to people, we all have a responsibility for what words we're speaking. So in our life is our words, and our life is all we have. So by what you're speaking to people, and if the influence you have to be very serious about those words and where they're going into people's ears and what they're saying to people. So really, to be truthful, Liberty was saying that the reason we call ourselves Liberty was about freedom, and freedom of expression, and it was the word. And the word that we clearly would have would be the word of protest.
September the 29th, an idea that had grown and formed to stop the city was to take place. A carnival in the streets, a protest against the companies and men who finance war, an occupation to stop people at theirs, peaceful blockades, a traffic-free zone. So what actually happened? The walls and pavements were daubed with coloured chalk, slogans and symbols that probably meant little to the city gents. Some blockades were formed and removed. There was conversation with city folk and some music made. The many arrests angered the free, some carried out by brutal police without their identification numbers. All day people rallied with banquets and starting points. A meeting at the Guildhall turned into a strong defiant show of force that marched through the streets, past the Bank of England to the Stock Exchange, while loud chanting echoed around the tall buildings. People banged on the doors and windows. Siege was laid until the horses arrived. But it was spontaneous, disorganised, except for the whispered word, a way of confusing the law. The result? The carnival was enjoyed, but the city was not stopped. They worked while under siege, even though many visited the carnival out of curiosity. Their dull day was brightened, but it left no mark. The next day most walls had been scrubbed of their graffiti messages. But the fact remains, power has been tested. If you try hard enough, things can work. If you go on trying, it will.
Never mind the bullshit, it's the facts. Second out for the same old songs, right back against the system that's poor and wrong. Get another better round against the wall of power. Blasphemous attacks below the leaders' cover. It's a message from those who won't take no more. I'm seeing a privilege profit from the bar. Of the scientists, piss they call research. Mints on whisker and should be bad. Well, bodies to the ball, keep smashing at the wall. Bolt pressure on, and government will fall. It takes more than music and more than words. To reclaim nations controlled by hordes. And police, army and funnels royals. And they're waiting for the balance from the people who care. To question and control the dividing line. Power must be tested, it's testing time. Power must be tested, we've heard that time and time again. But no matter how much pain and protest, nothing seems to change. The government shows forces and our movement cows in fear. Substance right for freedom, while others simply sneer. Side roll racking with a side roll song. Well, it's the same fucking system and it still stands strong. The battle continues, so follow so led. We mark out around the kid and battle again. Try working for something that the system can't make. Creating something that the law can't take back. As a loss of privilege, living our life. Power ain't been just so now's the time to fuck 'em up again, fuck 'em up again, fuck 'em up again.
We did things like the Onion gig, where I think we played at the Pied Ball in Islington, which is something else now. God knows what it is. Was it Clarendon? Was it?
Clarendon Hotel.
So we decided beforehand we were getting so fed up with this stuff, this dressing in black stuff, and talking about vegetarianism and blah blah blah. And so we decided to change all of the words to the songs to pickled onions. So national service became pickled onions, pickled onions, pickled onions, they're not for me. Pickled onions, pickled onions, pickled onions are going to kill me. You know, so we would do this. And then the gig after that, we had a load of people throwing pickled onions at us. But we had changed all the words to trolls then, because we'd had this weird night where we got into trolls. So it become trolls, 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 they're not for me. I don't know what it became, but we would pick up on things like this and go with it, and we thought this was great. And some people thought it was great, but a lot of people thought so we found it difficult to get gigs, really, and our popularity declined, I think.
Apart from the people who we know.
We also got very experimental as the Erratics. Towards the end of the Erratics, we were getting quite experimental then, because we also saw that we were very different to everyone. We had this audience, we was playing with these bands because everyone knew us, but we were trying to take it off somewhere. So we started developing experimental numbers which we were not capable of achieving or playing at all, and give them a go, you know, and they wouldn't fucking work. But we had, I think, embarked on experimentation. We were gonna play with this. We weren't gonna play the game.
We'd always said to people, don't get too dogmatic with your ideas. And your ideas have to be open to ideas. And you have to be, you're not standing up there and saying, prove me wrong sort of thing with what I'm singing about, but if there's another angle on it, like, well, look at that angle. We were always encouraging people to do that, and didn't just follow us either. And just because we sing it in a certain style or whatever, don't do that. But some people did take that route, and I felt that was pretty negative. You know, people were becoming vegetarians not because they particularly wanted to become vegetarians. They only wanted to become vegetarians to fit in with the crowd, fit in with the social group, and that was exactly what we were trying to. We were sort of up against before that, because with the original punk thing, everybody had to dress like the Clash or the Damned or whatever, your favourite band, you know, and when the Crass thing came along, I suppose there'd be a lot of clones. They would just want to be like Crass. I suppose we were accused of that at first as well, originally, but I think we proved otherwise. We weren't clones of Crass. You know, we were just tremendously inspired by what they'd done. So that was a few of the negative aspects. And there was also that constant sort of pointing the finger at, like, what are you doing? You know, sort of thing. You know, you're a hypocrite, etc., etc. And if you're not out in that hunt sabotage on a Saturday morning at 6:30, helping to save the fox, you know, you're suspect, you know, all this kind of thing had happened. And I'd done all that myself. I've been out there and doing it. I suppose your initial enthusiasm for the politics and ideas would make you maybe accuse your mates of not being, you know, up to scratch with the politics and stuff, and that, you know. But it came away from being a really healthy argument or discussion about politics to become too dogmatic. So I felt that was really negative. That was one of the reasons why I thought we should finish the band, really, and move on to other things. But the positive things that happened at that time are far outweigh all the negative stuff. Like.
while Belfast was certainly, parts of it were being blown up by paramilitaries, other parts of it were in huge developmental decline. And rather than kind of, as it were, regenerate or redevelop working class communities gradually, what they'd done was they simply wiped them out from the map, and relocated all those communities in suburban and rural areas. And also they had, which made a big difference to people in Belfast at that time, was they decided, in line with a lot of other cities, that roads were more important to people. So they put a road, the ring road, right through Belfast, which cut these traditional communities in half and decimated them. So I wrote about all these sorts of things, about how planners didn't give a damn about working class people, how their housing was appalling, how they were being shifted around the place.
He's fucked all good to say about anybody. 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 The sort of shite who hates giving to charity, believing it only clears up the state's mess, but gives anyway. The sort of creep who knows that tinking around with the RUC won't matter a damn. They're out there to get you in. Nice guy, officer. The sort of silly idiot who believes that three beats anything any planner can dream up. A professional whinger who disgorges apocalyptic rhetoric. The world is about to end. You're all going to die. The ozone, the ozone. The sunny weather, it's lasting too long. A disruptor who, when local residents are about to reach accommodation with orange marchers, erupts. No passeran! No passeran!
I think it was one of the only places that I've been where I've actually seen how serious the situation is and how much hatred's involved with some people, and not fully understand why. Do you understand? I mean, I think I'd said a lot about the situation, but never fully understood it, if you know what I mean.
The 70s were grim, mostly. The centre of town was fairly dead, completely dead. At night time there was nothing whatsoever until punk arrived, really. And even then it was still dead, apart from the harp.
Harp bar.
The harp bar was
But
real.
getting the harp bar was difficult because you had to go through the security gates, get harassed, searched.
That was the least of my worries. I had to cross York Street, which when you came from the New Lodge was like crossing the fucking river or something like that, you know. You're just taking your life in your hands. This was like when the Shankill Butchers were still knocking about York
Street.
Street.
Through the centre of Belfast to get down into, you know.
Heaps in West Belfast, he doesn't understand anything, you know. The People's Republic of West Belfast, you know. North Belfast was a completely different story. But anyhow, what were we talking about?
Punk rock in Belfast.
Punk rock in Belfast, yeah.
Harp bar, we all met at the very beginning.
That's where we met, aye.
It's hard. Again, politics comes into it, and although you know what you think's right, just by saying that, you become part of a political side with the Irish situation, I think, you know what I mean? Even though you know something's right, it became like that for me. I enjoyed it, and it was nice going there. It's probably one of the only times I've ever been very, very nervous of a situation, which alerted me to how bad a situation was there.
For me, it just seemed like it was the same game but with much more extreme rules.
We aspired to run the centre on anarchist principles. We, you know, political talk, big P's, small p, whatever. We did talk politically a lot, and we aspired to. We were trying to create a kind of a new society, albeit within those walls. We did try to have equality, diversity, a kind of a welcome to everybody. But actually, you know, on reflection, it takes more than. I suppose now looking back, I think it takes more than an aspiration to do that. You've got to work out practical ways of setting that up, and that's where we faltered a bit.
After Cross, for personally speaking, as you know, I really get into songwriting and stuff and the style of the music that was started to do then after TC and Tull left. I was just totally influenced by the whole thing. Like, you know, it was like this idea of music can be a way of just communicating fairly radical ideas, stuff that, you know, even at the time for me when I was reading all the cross lyrics and stuff like that, I was going, they're talking about something here that's impossible and something that can never happen. But you know, I mean, the anarcho-punk thing is, for want of a better fucking term, I hate the term, but it was a way then of us going, okay, well, you know, rather than identifying, I fucking said this and I said this before, but rather identifying with the King's Road idea of punk, you know, and the spiky hair and the boy clothing and seditionaries and the fucking cheesecloths. It was about identifying with ideas.
I was part of the kind of kids at school who knew there was something wrong and didn't like the status quo and didn't like the situation and was getting into trouble in ways, you know, for arguing about stuff. But lots of other kind of kids thought they were like, you know, political kind of communists or, you know, radical liberals or something like that. And I wasn't into any of that. And it was quite literally the kind of coming across Feeding the 5,000 by Crass, which gave me a notion that, anarchism, maybe that's not just about what the BBC News says, and that's kind of chaos. So I kind of went down to a local radical bookshop in Leicester and found a Freedom paper, found a paper called Extra, found a paper called Plain Logo from Belfast, I think it was. And that was it. From then on, I've been into kind of anarcho-punk.
I'd worked my way around the trade, and I was working in my very first anarchist print shop, which is a print shop called Little A, based down in Wapping. And it was run by a guy called Chris Broad and someone called Charlotte Baggins and a few other people who were all part of this scene. So they'd set up an anarchist print shop so that they could get their stuff printed, basically, and publish their pamphlets and print Anarchy magazine. And I went there to work. But by that time, things weren't going so well at Little A Press. And Chris and people like that had moved on, and had kind of, you know, were doing other things. So I was actually living down in southwest London at the time and commuting up to Wapping to East London to work. But I basically took on Anarchy magazine and started a new collective. And some punks and people like that, you know, what to me were kids. By this time I'm 23, 24, and these kids are coming along who've got turned on to Anarchy by Crass and, you know, Crisis and bands and whatever, and, you know, were wanting to find out about Anarchy. So if they went out there to find out about Anarchy, sooner or later they'd come across Anarchy magazine. That finished around 1984, 85. But there was loads of publishing going on. And it was, you know, there was always this kind of cultural anarchism and political anarchism going on at the same time, and clashing with each other.
Amebix was, if you like, using the anarcho-punk movement as a vehicle to be able to release our records. Some of our feelings at the time were certainly, you know, originally inspired by people like Crass, and I think that we would have liked to have been politically motivated, but that was never really what was going on. We were always about something else. We were always about the underside, the flip side. We were always about the tunnels down inside of the music, you know, where that leads. My life is not entirely resolved, but I haven't got anything to complain about. I look at the world around me and I think, yeah, you know, there's a lot of wrong stuff. A lot of things go on that you want to be able to say, no, I don't agree with that with. But I think that the primary way that we change the world is through the relationships we have with other people. It's through our family, and it's through our friends. It's through the people that we know and how we communicate. You know, be good to one another. If you do that, then you have the essence of how to change the whole world, because enough people do that, and it's going to get around eventually. Enjoy life and let others enjoy life too. Don't force people to do things they don't want to do. That's it, you know? No gods, no masters.
Daily Country Day was just a collection of the best tracks we had at that point in time. I think what really marked it out was Nick Lance's artwork. He'd written me a letter asking for basic band information about the Subhumans. At the bottom of the letter was a tiny little 1-inch picture of a punk rocker's head done in this really fine pen artwork. It's like, wow, we needed a cover, we weren't artists. So I wrote back and said, can you do, actually this is for the Religious Wars EP, can you do a cover for this song for a 7-inch? Heard nothing back, but 3 weeks later it arrived in the post, fully formed. It was like, wow. So we asked him again to do the Daily Country Day one. He spent a couple of months over that and full-on cover. That kind of really put it in people's heads a lot more because of that. If it had bad artwork, maybe the whole thing would have gone differently. But the tunes are pretty good. We tried to link all the tunes together as much as possible, have them flowing one to the other to make it more non-stop and sort of connect it all together.
What was informing the politics of people like Crass and the Poison Girls and Honeybane, I think, was, as far as I could see, was nothing more than just a genuine desire for punk to sort of not sell out, to not become power pop, to not become new wave, to not become another fad, and to pursue the idea of a lifestyle, which not just those bands, but a lot of punks were doing anyway, of course. I think it was just really to give a soundtrack to the people who were living the punk lifestyle, as opposed to moving on to the mod revival. That predates, I think, an anarcho-punk movement, because I think the anarcho-punk movement was a different kettle of fish. But I think those initial bands were just coming from a very pure place. The whole reason Crass hung an Anarchy banner at their gigs was to get both the left and the right wings off their back. The reason they hung a peace banner at their gigs was to get rid of the anarchists off their back, the kind of let's blow up everybody anarchists. And it just kind of spiraled from there, really. I think the definitions of what became known as the anarcho-punk movement. I think when the anarcho-punk movement started, it was not an anarcho-punk movement. I think it was just a reaction to punk rock and the way it was going.
I was on one weekday afternoon. It was Steve Ignorant, and he'd phoned me up. Gary, what's up? How you doing? And we'd met a few times. I've been to a lot of crash shows out of London, and because I've been out of London and that, they kind of see you on a regular basis. Me and Steve have swapped numbers, but never actually spoke to him outside a gig, I guess. Anyway, he phones me up and he says, a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes, but basically they had a tour booked and they'd fallen out with the Poison Girls, or the Poison Girls didn't want. There was some animosity going on at the time which needed to be resolved. Anyway, the Poison Girls were not going to go on the tour and they needed a band. And I don't believe they'd actually seen us, but they'd heard about us, and they knew we were a 5-piece, and it wasn't all male, whereas, say, the Erratics, the Mob, everything was an all-male band. We were not an all-male band. We kind of stood out. and they said, can we come see you? So I was like, okay, we have a rehearsal in a church hall next Wednesday. We always, booked a rehearsal space somewhere. Anyway, we set up as if we were doing a gig, because that's the way we would naturally rehearse, drums, amps, everything facing forwards. Anyway, I told the others, we're going to have some visitors. I said, Steve's coming down. Oh, cool. Anyway, we set up, and the door opened, and 6 people from Crass came walking in. And it was like, how you doing? You just carry on. So I was like, fuck, we had a little... It was funny. There's no way of describing it. It was just funny. Here we were rehearsing. It was a gig for 6 people. And they just sat there and they watched. And they clapped. Like you do at a gig. And then we had like a beer break, a cigarette break. And we started talking. I was like, very good, thanks. Good to meet you all, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, next week I got the call. It was like, can you guys come up to Dial House, which is where they all lived? Oh, yeah, okay. So we all jumped in the van, shot up there. And they laid it out for us. They had a tour booked, and it was like 10 days or something around the UK. I think we done 6 shows around that time. That's all we've done. And it was like, we want you guys to come on the road. Do you have transport? Well, we have a van. It's like, well, so we had 2 vans, their van and our van. Shared the van, shared the equipment, and it was like, we're on the road. We're going on tour with Crass. And I said to Dino, I told you. It's like, if you want something bad enough, you'll just get it. And it wasn't that we actually actively went out and sought it. It was just the way we did things. We were positive about it, and we got our faces shown, and we didn't play the game. It was, we're going to create our own environment, and we did it. And that was it. Crass took us under their wing, if you like.
A narco-punk thing, I think one of the biggest battles within it, almost from the very beginning, was this battle between strict ideology and strict ways of doing things and what was right, and on the other side, look, this is about, it's called anarcho-punk. Anarchism is about thinking for yourself. It's about doing things that are different. It is about working with other people and cooperative, and it is about social responsibility, but it's about being different and being creative and trying to work out your own way of doing things. It took a lot of people a long time to resolve that battle, and some people it never got resolved, because some people just thought, right, okay, this is not about a sort of wide, broad-ranging way of trying to, live your life in cooperation with other people. It's a set of rules.
I like music. I like our music.
She used to be a mod.
But that was beside the point.
But that wasn't... David told that wasn't bad, snappy. But like, you must have liked mod music. I did. I changed.
And some of those rules are, we had people that came and stayed in. We'd be putting people up for the night who travel from all over. They'd turn up with their sleeping bags, knock on your door. Never seen you before. Great, come in, you and all your mates. And then they'd come in and they'd say, see, you've got instant coffee. How come, you've got instant coffee on the shelves? Because, it's a cash crop. And so you'd have this big thing, and you'd think, this is ridiculous, All the politics I've sort of ever had, which I feel really strongly about, I try my best not to sort of try and force them on other people as a moral imperative, as a way of saying, I'm better than you, because I think that, for instance, I don't eat at McDonald's. I think McDonald's is shit. But you who work in McDonald's, I'm not going to have a conversation with you and tell you that you are morally inferior to me and you're shit and your life is crap because you've never bothered working it out that McDonald's is shit. And do you know what I mean? I don't like that. I don't like that attitude of moral superiority. And that was always there. People writing back to us saying, you forgot to soap the stamps. This is totally out of order. Please, next time you write, could you make sure you soap the stamps?
Can you smell the new smell travelling through the air? Aye, I can, lad. It's a coming from over there, over the hills, Down in Valley, there's no buildings there. There's a nuclear power dump site. Someone doesn't care. Parliament says it's safe. But why not bury it there?
The great thing about New Smell is that the main song is Tube Disasters, which really, in a way...
Tube Disaster?
Is it?
It is.
It's
You
called
see, everyone calls it Tube Disasters.
Okay,
It really
Tube
winds
Disaster.
me up.
Well, we wrote that years before and had dropped it
1978.
as an old Epileptic song.
Yeah, well, I only realised recently that we did the Epileptics demo in March '79, and it wasn't
we
even on
dropped
that
it.
because by
I
that
know,
time we
and
weren't playing
it's
it.
become the classic.
Yeah.
But for me, that was written because we were living up in London. So I'm travelling on the tube, and just before that, it had the Moorgate Tube Disaster, and I wrote it as a bit of a shocky punk song. I love Tube Disasters. Derek later said, "Oh, it's about people that enjoy watching news footage of that kind of thing, and people not meaning to, but sort of getting off on it." But to be honest, I wrote it purely as a stupid song.
One thing that did become apparent, having interviewed all these bands, is that there was a far greater percentage of people involved in the anarcho-punk scene that have stayed true to the commitments they made whilst in a punk band, 20 odd years ago, right through to the present day. So I think anarcho-punk did affect people on such a profound level that, it left its mark. It left an indelible mark on them for life. And that's what struck me about the book, is everybody, well, virtually everybody, is still, to a lesser or greater extent, they're still leading their life, by their own terms wherever possible. At the very least, when they hear a news report on the TV about, this bogus war in Iraq or whatever, I mean, they're reading between the lines and the lies, and and I think that's a mindset that's been with them since they heard their first Crass record. I think that's how long it stayed with them. In the hands of anarcho-punk, I think we'd have a very healthy future for our kids. But unfortunately, it was a minority movement. Else we might not be in the situation we are today. It sounds horribly cliched, but I think there is hope for us as long as we're prepared to think for ourselves.
The music press generally at that point were kind of trendy lefties, I suppose. In NME, certainly they were trendy lefties. In Sounds, they were more interested in the sort of concept of street level punk, which became Oi, if you like. And Melody Maker never really mattered. So NME always covered Crass with a lot of generosity and kind of ignored the anarcho-punk movement beyond that, because they thought that the more sort of mainstream left wing was where it was at in regards fighting Thatcher, if you like.
I do think that we were
very seminal to the whole politicisation of punk, to making it into a serious cultural and political movement. But ultimately, you can't create a movement out of yourself, you know. So it's not as if people would say, oh, well, you're just talking to the converted. Well, who fucking converted them? Firstly, they themselves converted. That some kid wakes up in the morning and doesn't like the fact that, you know, they've got to go to some dumbass school to be taught about Jesus Christ and algebra. You know, there's something better in their life. So they skank off school and go down the record store and buy a crass record and think, wow, yeah, this looks good, I'll do a bit of that. So it's not like we don't know what the fuck was going on with our records or what we were saying. It was the spirit of the people that made it possible, not us. All we did was act as a sort of catalyst. No, it wasn't, you know, we weren't special. What was special was some fucking kid in, you know, I can't be special. I had a very privileged background. I had a very comfortable upbringing. That's special enough, you know. I'll always be, in that sense, comfortable. Thanks very much. You know, I don't have a fucking thing to my name, but I'm very comfortable about it. And that's to do with class. Well, that's nothing, is it? Anyone like me can do that, but some kid in Glasgow or some kid in Belfast who's got absolutely fuck all and has the courage to think, well, it could be a bit better, couldn't it? And then sees something which says, well, yeah, maybe it could be a bit better. Maybe you could this, maybe you could that. And that's all we did, was just right, maybe you could this and maybe you could do that. And out of that, people found a life. Well, it was their courage, not ours. I mean, we were getting fucking paid for it. Not a lot, but...
Well, everything we were saying and doing at that time is still relevant now. It always has been. Politically, you could almost see what we were saying in 1982, 83 all happening in the 20 years. The thing with Afghanistan, with the Gulf War, we were kind of warning people way back then that this would escalate. But nowadays it's just more technology to fight against. I think that what Crass had to say was still relevant in 2006, even more so.
30 years later, and I still can't walk out the house looking like this without someone, well, everybody would say something. It's not just about the way I look, it's about what I've got to say and what I do. So I think that people have realised that punks did have something to say, and they're still, you know, there's war in the world today and people aren't happy with it. People aren't happy with the way the world is, and they're going to go back to punk, and they're going to go back to the politics of punk, and they're going to look at vegetarianism, and they're going to look at war and CND and the way women are treated and the way, you know, violence in the world is perpetuated from animals right up to women and then to other countries, and people are going to look at the environment again, and people are worried, and people will go back to being punks. And they're looking at the 80s anarcho scene because it actually did say something, but also it was repressed, of course. I mean, 80s, what people don't understand is in the 80s all we had was John Peel, and we was lucky we had that.
We took off on an old Erratics number which was our most experimental at the time, which we were incapable of playing, called The March of the Sods, isn't it? Yeah. Called The March of the Sods. And out of doing the erratic set again, we started doing this in a kind of psychedelic, kind of bluesy way. And I remember thinking to myself as we're playing this, hang on, you know, it was almost like my youth had pointed to me. It couldn't do it then, but it had pointed to something. And we suddenly took off on it and said, let's do something with this number. Woohoo!
We're in Rusty Ringo System of the Dancers. We're in Rusty Ringo System of the Dancers. We're in Rusty Ringo in a pretty shade of white. We're in Rusty Ringo's one and only lovely.
And a lot of that anarcho music really, really means something to them. And when we were playing, you know, it was 6 years to the night after what they characterise as the night the Americans bombed Belgrade. And we were doing some of those old songs. We were doing target, you know, and there's this sort of chant in it, "You're welcome here, Americans, we love you, but not your bombs." And we were doing that. And, you know, and people were singing along with it. And it really meant something in that situation. It was really, you know, really pertinent to what was going on there, because those places are fucked. You know, those places are really poor, and you know, really suffering from what has gone on over there. And a lot of that anarcho stuff, it really means something to them, you know, and they take a lot of inspiration from it, and they're starting to do their own thing and get their own bands together, their own gigs together, their own fanzines together. But more than that, you know, their own little kind of community organisations and, you know, little kind of autonomy centres and stuff. So, you know, it's all very underground, but, you know, you kind of depend on things like that. You know, there's a long history of kind of political music, you know, and sometimes it's kind of at the forefront and sometimes it's underground.
The funny thing is, in a way, that in some ways nothing has changed, because, you know, from the political point of view, looking at the Houses of Parliament, you could say that things is very, very similar. You know, you've got a government in control, which is very much in control. I mean, okay, Labour is now losing their relative strength in terms of numbers, but for a long time they've been able to do what they want, and that's pretty much what Thatcher was able to do with a majority in the House of Parliament. And she was able to go to war without consulting the country, and without, you know, just, or shall we say, with fooling the country with lies and deception about the Belgrano, which we all knew, well, some of us knew at the time had to be a lie and was bound to be a lie. And, you know, guess what? A few years later, oh yeah, it was sailing away from the forces, but we sank it, and hey, then we went to war. Great. Well, they went to war against us, and guess what? You know, Blair did the same thing with Iraq and weapons of mass destruction and fooling the country, lying for the press, all that bullshit. You know, it's the same, and it always has been the same, and always will be the same. And yes, they get better sometimes at disguising it, and sometimes, you know, it's so blatant, it's amazing that, you know, more people don't seem to wake up to it. But maybe people are just bored of, like, even thinking about the fact that they're probably being lied to. I mean, I think that's the biggest, you know, problem we've had for years now, has been apathy. You know, the George Orwell kind of concept, which we used to think, well, 1984, it's coming along. It's not really about slavery in terms of chains. It's all about slavery in terms of mental chains, and not actually being interested in thinking about breaking out or trying to, you know, make a change. It's about apathy.
There's a fight to the death going on. It's a fight to the death between capital and the working class, and punk and anarchy and all these other things are just part of that fight to the death. We have to think globally. We have to think big, and this is serious.
Do they owe us a living? Of course they fucking do.
So there was another side to us, really. I think people thought we were just living this 100% full on.
And we didn't smile.
No, we probably didn't. And we shouted. Yeah, you thought the more you shouted, the more angry you could be.
The more persuasive power.
Yeah. And I think now when people say, "Oh right, just done a Google search on Flux Pink Indians," I think, "Oh my god, all that's going to come is the fucking cunts treat us like pricks." And I think, "Oh, that wasn't my idea, honestly." And you think, "God almighty, oh well."
It's been really interesting because not only has everybody, for 23 or 4 years, whatever, not only has everybody spelt it wrong, every single time more or less, but it's one of them names that people don't really know what the name is, but they remember it because it's weird. Like it's Jumbly Wumbly or something. Whereas I think if we'd have been called something a bit more normal, it might have disappeared. No, that's probably not true.
Steve of Crass, probably the first person I met that had got in. He'd been over to the States, I don't know, and he'd got into American Indian stuff. And to me, it seemed like quite a good way of life. Even though it was 100 or so years ago, and the whole story seemed. I was very interested in it, so we had to come up with a new name after the Epileptics, because the Epileptics was a little bit a throwback 77, sort of like, let's just call ourselves a name that will annoy everyone. And then thought, well, we're not Red Indians, we're pink skinned, so it'd be Pink Indians. And originally it was going to be Tribe of Pink Indians, but our drummer at the time thought the Tribe sounded a bit strange, so I looked in Rose's, well, I called it Rose's Treasures, but it's probably Rose's Thesaurus, and in there was Flux, I think. I'm sure I've looked back since, I can't find it. Yeah. So he said, well, what about Flux of Pink Indians? So we come up with that name. We went to Stonehenge, played with Crass, and we'd sprayed it on a backdrop, and Crass said, oh, so it's our new name, Flux Pink Indians, and Penny went, don't even think about it. I said, you're joking. Right, and it's amazing that we sort of stuck with it and it wasn't too bad. But I do like the word flux. Yeah. There's something about that four-letter word.
It's all the implications of it, that state of change.
Yeah, I think flux was.
Which is why I used it in the first place.
Yeah, the Flux being Indians is great, but the flux bit is great. My nan used to go, I'm sure I saw you on top of the pops the other night, and I said, no, it's a flock of seagulls. So it was a bit of a funny name. But,
And so on, I think it's a natural human reaction. Or maybe an imposed one, but it's a human reaction either way, to think you've got to be special in order to affect social change. And what I'm trying to do with this book is prove that Crass weren't special. They just affected social change. In other words, anyone can do it. Back to the DIY. So yeah, do it yourself would be the kind of ultimate message in my book. And get pissed destroyed.